So like imagine like a black community in Europe or in Netherlands, and they say like we want to create Orania like community in France or in Germany. How would you see that?
Well, I've been in Brussels and I've seen that there are certain neighborhoods which are very specifically Muslim neighborhoods. I've seen it with my own eyes. So is that wrong? That they don't even allow the police in. There's no-go zones for the police. I've seen it. Very long ago, Africa was only black and Europe was only white and Russia and so on and so on. And now there's white people in South Africa which doesn't belong in. That's the preposition of that question. And that is a bogus question. Afrikaners has been in South Africa for longer than the United States existed. We have a right to be here, and no one will tell me that because I have a white skin, I'm not welcome in Africa. That is absolute nonsense. To even presume such a thing would to say that, you know, you can just turn that around and say, well, okay, black people must leave Europe or America. I think we're really past that kind of narrative. Communities are natural things. If you force it on a government level, you get forced integration or forced segregation. Orania isn't busy with either of those things. We have a right to be in Africa, and it's really the kind of question that's been so cliched over the years to presuppose that white people doesn't belong in Africa, doesn't have a part here culturally, historically, that they haven't evolved in terms of the name of our people, Afrikaners, our language, Afrikaans, and more, we are part of this continent. To presuppose that we are not supposed to be in an African country is to play into the flames, or to put petrol on the flames of inflammatory politicians like Julius Malema, who is suggesting, you know, large-scale violence and pushing white people out, and I will not be complicit in such nonsense.
White people understand my message very well because I say it in English. They are just trying to be sensitive unnecessarily. No EFF has ever attacked any white person. Our position is very clear that those who are oppressed economically must be liberated to be equal to white people. I never said in my articulation, let's drive white people to the sea. I've always said, let there be equality. And white people who are racist and suffer from white supremacy are the ones who are refusing the equality because they don't see themselves sharing a dinner table with monkeys. That's how they view us.
On 13th April 1991, Orania was officially opened as an Afrikaner town with the purpose of being a homeland for Afrikaners. It was an entirely white town, littered with old apartheid flags and monuments to the architects of segregation.
St. Paddy's was on Sunday, actually, I think so. Yeah. We're currently on Monument Hill. Monument Hill is overlooking Orania. It's a place where there are some statues that we as Oranians, let's say, rescued. None of these statues that you see here made by or bought by Oranians. It's all been thrown away elsewhere or donated to Orania. And you can see that these statues are set up in a half circle. And what they represent is they are in the past, they are part of our history, but for us, the future stands here in the middle. This statue is called the Little Giant, and it represents we must create our own future. You can see he's rolling up his sleeves to work himself. No one is going to give you or guarantee you a future. The only person, earthly person, that can guarantee you a future is yourself by doing your work, and we as a community do our own work and create our own future. So by the grace of God and through our hard labor here in Orania, it's the only way we can create a future for ourselves. So in 1952 already, Sabra suggested that the solution is Afrikaners grouping in one place, doing their own labor, and creating, in that sense, an area where they can make their own decisions and live out their own ambitions and make religious and cultural decisions for themselves. So Orania is not a reaction to the end of apartheid. Orania is not trying to recreate it. To tell the truth, the people who developed this idea was already very active in doing such in the 1950s, and we have documents showcasing that the idea of own labour has been brought forward in that stage. Especially it got momentum in the 70s and 80s, while apartheid was still on its height. So it's not a reaction to the end of apartheid, no, it's much rather an idea standing on its own feet, and way back then already Afrikaners identified own labour, own piece of land and own institutions as the only way to go forward with the communities of South Africa.
But Orania wasn't created in the 1950s or 70s or 80s. It was created in 1991, a year after Nelson Mandela's release from Robben Island, and 3 years before the country's first democratic election. So critics argue that it certainly was a reaction to the racist segregation system of apartheid coming to an end. The truth is, by the end of the 1980s, the game was up for the apartheid system, and the fear and likelihood of losing dominance and control had seeped into the psyche of many Afrikaners, with some believing that the fast approaching democracy that would bring black majority through posed an existential threat to their way of life.
Other people will not have the nationality, won't be members of the state. We're treated as foreigners as anywhere else in the world. Orania will stretch from this point on the map to the Atlantic coast in the west, and from the Orange River in the north to about the Graafrenet latitude, which will be approximately an area of, say, 400,000 square kilometers.
Orania. I think it was about a month ago.
We hope that we can make a good future for our kids. We don't have to be crowded, we don't have to be pushed out of our own vicinities. We got their own culture, they got their own culture. Our culture doesn't agree with theirs. Theirs doesn't agree with us.
Another issue that Orania's proponents gloss over is the fact that the town was not built on vacant land as their narrative claims. According to historian Edward Kavanagh, in 1991, just 3 years before the fall of apartheid, black and mixed-race families who had lived on land that had earlier been earmarked for a failed canal project were evicted from an area near the Orange River to pave way for Orania. Kavanagh described the evictions as violent and brutal. The families were pistol-whipped and had dogs set on them.
Orania is obviously based on firm principles, of which at least one broad principle would be religiously defined. We are Protestant Christians. One would be culturally defined. We are Afrikaans-speaking Afrikaners with the history that goes with that. And one would be economically defined, the matter of labor within our economy and the responsibility that we take to exercise our own labor, which of course also has some political implications. Orania definitely does not represent every Afrikaner or all the Afrikaners. We represent a group of people who throw their weight behind this concept. We do undertake this whole project of Orania, this whole effort of Orania, not as or in the name of all Afrikaners, but to the advantage of all Afrikaners, because having a cultural powerhouse and having a secure space where you can live according to your values and your traditions is important, even if you don't at a certain stage live there. Even if you're not there, the mere existence of it may be of very much importance.
Only white Afrikaners are allowed to live and work in Orania. They claim to preserve Afrikaner culture, but culture isn't usually restricted on racial lines. Yet residency and the right to work in Orania is.
the whole question of apartheid is complex, and I do expect that from our point of view, from a white middle class to a black workers perspective, that would be very different. I think we could easily accept that the lack of recognition and reciprocity and participation, which was in the end the main sort of characteristic of apartheid, made it something that went down in history as something of a scandal. So we've got that on our record, we've got that on our bill, but we don't stop there. We say during all that time, we were not monsters, our fathers and mothers were not monsters. They were people trying to deal with the challenges of their time in ways in which we could learn much if we go beyond the obvious. Once we have established South Africa not as a monolith, as a unitary state, but as a community of communities, that would be the ideal South Africa. The present crumbling up of South Africa could easily end up with a bunch of warlords taking control.
No, thanks, Chair. So the presentation from Orania, is he saying that we must still be stuck on the semi-colonial apartheid exclusion of the black majority in Africa in particular? Is that what you're advocating for? You leave Orania to come here to Parliament to say that we must protect the inequalities in terms of land allocation. Is that what you're trying to say to us today here? That we must leave the currently skewed land ownership patterns where the white minority are in control and ownership of huge tracts of land when our people are staying like pilchards in a tin in many informal settlements, here in the Western Cape, in Gauteng and all over. When our people do not have access to just basic land which was taken to them through colonial dispossession and violence. Is that what you're saying we must do?
While there are no rules preventing black people from visiting, those who live nearby fear they will be met with violence. African Stream was allowed to visit after writing to the community and explaining our intentions.
I think because Orania is selling a dream and they're selling hope. It's a town that works, it's safe. It's a good mix of people coming here. I won't be able to say it's a certain age group. There's young people, older people looking for retirement, young people looking for work, people wanting to move their families here. There's quite a few families. The husbands work overseas and then they just move their families here because they know they'll be safe and they'll be able to have a good upbringing here. So it's a good mix. And again, I think it's just they are looking for the community feel, to be able to speak Afrikaans and live the Afrikaans culture. That's what they're looking for, and safety, and services that work.
24 hours in Orania was interesting. It's just unfortunate that the situation in South Africa has put some people to feel that they have to align themselves according to the racial lines and form a community. So it's just unfortunate that not everyone is allowed to stay here as a resident, like all other areas in South Africa, you know.
Anyone can come and apply for right to residency in Orania. It doesn't mean that you will be successful in that venture. It doesn't matter if a person comes from a country where he's maybe a white person, but he's not an Afrikaner in culture, in traditions, in religion, then Orania is a specific community. There are even some Afrikaners in South Africa. Obviously, Orania is not trying to be everything for everyone. So there are people who maybe doesn't like our conservative ways, or people who doesn't want to use the system of own labor, and they simply won't enjoy living here in that sense. Orania's end goal was always to create a home or a homeland for Afrikaners. a place where we can make decisions for ourselves, do things the way that we see fit, where we can choose in which mother tongue our children are educated, which religion we practice and so on. So it's to be a home for Afrikaners, a place where we can truly come home. We don't have another home. But also, if the history were different, it wouldn't make Orania less necessary, because the Orania approach is a universalist approach to universal problems. Any people who want to preserve their heritage, their religion, their faith, their culture, must do it in a certain fashion. And that fashion in the current year is to group together demographically in an area and then make decisions for themselves. Whether people think that's good or bad thing is a different story. The reality of it is that is the only way for a culture to survive. So it doesn't matter how we came to be where we are where we are, and we need to deal with that.
South African lawyer Thembeka Nkaitobi, who is also one of the lawyers representing South Africa in its ICJ case against Israel, says the existence of Orania violates South Africa's successive dismantling of racial segregation, arguing that it, quote,
represents downright hostility to the idea of a single, united, non-racial country.
Let us know what you think in the comments.